Here we are again with another alcohol marker practice, this time leaves and flowers. So I have my markers all ready to go. I was sure to remember the protectant for my table. You could still see the scarring from my last video where I practiced blending and doing spheres, and I have my swatches nearby for color reference. We're all set to go. So first thing I'm gonna do here is find a quick color reference to use for my leaf. So this one I thought, okay, let's start with a typical green leaf. And I decided to throw in a little more yellow to it. So I have this kind of yellowish green in the center, and I started with that as the base because I learned from my last video, start with the lightest, work my way to the darkest. And then I put the midtones in between. Now I didn't really match my reference super closely. It was more to give me an idea of where shadows are gonna be, but it did give me some inspiration. Then I continued on adding some of the darker tones around the edges because that's what I saw in the reference. I did think about doing some veining a little bit. I didn't ultimately like how it looked, so I was not very happy with this first leaf. I do not think I did super well with it. I think I should have stayed a little bit lighter. I think I went too dark too fast. So that's something I learned in this time around, is it's easy to go too dark too fast. So with this next one, I decided to do more of a fall leaf. So I have a little bit of green in there, but orange, red, and a little yellow. So I started with the yellow this time and then added in that patch of green. So I'm kind of like color blocking in this first time around, and then I'll go through and kind of blend as I go. This one, again, I feel like I did a little bit better with the color placement, and I didn't go too dark too fast nearly as much, but I don't feel like I did as great with the blending. So slowly getting a little bit better, but still definitely room for improvement. So I just continued on with layers, trying to get things to blend, trying to get it to look a little bit more like my reference in the way that the colors just fade in from one to the next. I finished it off with a little bit of brown detail and then called it good for that leaf. This next one I decided to have a little bit of fun with this kind of neon green around the edge and deep purple in the middle. So I knew right off the bat, okay, I gotta start with the lightest. So I went around with a really light green and did that kind of border along with some stippling going into the leaf because that's what I saw in the reference. And then I went over that with another round of a little bit more of a stronger yellow green. Then I committed to going in with my first kind of deepish reddish purple. And when I got to the edges, you can see how I'm doing a little bit of stippling, drawing some circles so that I can still get the effect of the leaf in the reference. So I just worked my way, filling it in, trying to keep that texture as I went. Now that I have that base layer down, I went in with the deeper purple and did the veining. And immediately I was like, ooh man, this looks dark. So I tried to blend it out. I used the chisel tip to work on the blending there. And ultimately I think it looked okay. Now one thing I tried doing is using my white Sharpie to do the veining, but the white Sharpie was not even drying. So instead, I went and got my Prismacolor pencil, and that worked for the veining. So now I know white Prisma is better than the white Sharpie I have. This next thing I did was a daisy for the first flower practice. Now I chose the daisy because I thought, okay, I want to try using these grays to do some subtle shadowing in the petals. So I found two grays, the green gray and the warm gray, and then I chose some yellows to do in the centers. So I decided to start with the center. I did the base of the light yellow, kind of did a scribbly method for the next two layers to get them to look like that texture. Then with the grays, I started with the actual middle gray, or the slightly darker one, and then I blended it out into the white with the lighter gray. So I kind of reversed my own rules of always starting light to dark, but I still feel like this was successful and it worked exactly how I wanted it to. Before I called it done, I did one more round on the shadows with that gray again, just to make the contrast a little bit better. And I really like this flower. I think it turned out well. I'm finally feeling like, okay, I can do some shading and blending with these markers. It's not been total failure. Next, I chose this super vivid flower because I want to use these pinks for something. So I found a couple of colors that I felt worked well together that would match the colors I needed for this bright pink neon flower. For the inside, it looks yellow on first glance, but if you look close, it's actually more of a greenish yellow. So that's why I chose this greenish yellow for the base. And then I chose like an olive green to do shadowing to show the texture of the inside of the flower in this instance. Now with the petals, I actually changed my methods many times. This first one worked out okay. I thought, okay, I'm gonna do like the lighter pink all over and then do the shadows on top. The downfall of this one is that lighter pink was actually a little bit too dark. So the whole petal just turned out pretty dark. I didn't have any like highlight areas. I tried to go in with a light pink, but obviously it didn't do anything. So these next petals, you can see, okay, I'm gonna start with this light pink first and then work my way to dark. So going back to my rules of light to dark and hopefully working it out that way. And I do feel like this got to be much more successful. So this petal, we have more of a variety in the values. We have light, middle, and then dark, rather than just light, middle, dark. So I tried to continue on with this method for the rest of the petals, kind of starting with light, blocking out where I want those, then the middle tones, and then adding those dark shadows. Here of, okay, what if I cover the whole thing in pink first, in that light pink first, and then worked into the shadows after that. And this is ultimately the method that I feel like was most successful because it had everything blocked out in the light pink so that if I wanted to leave anywhere as a highlight, it was already covered. And I didn't have to worry about not having enough lights. It's already all there. So that was kind of the method I ended up landing on as my favorite one for doing the flowers. So that's how I finished off the rest. I decided to move on to the trumpet flowers in the bottom row of this worksheet. So I found this cool reference, not the exact same flower, but I loved the color story here. So I started with, again, my lightest color as a base, and I just filled the whole section in and then worked in the dark shadows and then midtones after that. So I kind of went in a little bit of a mixed up order, but still overall kind of dark to, or light to dark. And then I took this kind of grayish orange color and used that to help fill in between the orange and the yellow. So it gives this kind of cool posterized almost type look between the colors. And then for the side, I decided to start with the yellow base, but I ended up realizing, okay, that's too light. I need to go darker to show the shading on the side here. So I covered most of that yellow with more of that grayed out orangish color. Then I just finish it off for fun with a little bit of green at the bottom for that leafy part. Okay, so the final flower I chose was the super cool blue and purple trumpet flower, and it was a little more of a challenge. I didn't match it exactly, but I felt like I got pretty close in the end. So I actually only used 4 colors in this one. I started with a base of bright pink and then did purple on top to get a little bit more of a glowing look that I saw in this flower. And then I based out most of the flower in the light blue and then went around it with the stronger, darker blue that we see covering most of that flower. I didn't have a color that exactly matched what I actually needed, so I'm wondering if I could do a little bit more layering, color mixing to get closer to that really strong blue if I had wanted to spend more time on this. I did struggle a little bit again with blending on this one, but ultimately it still turned out okay. On the side, when I get to that part, I ended up basing it out in the purple and then putting pink on top because this is a very light side to the flower. So that is it for this color mixing practice. Just finishing off labeling my colors here. And I feel like I already learned even more, and I'm super excited to get to the next practice I have here, which is to try doing some hair color. So again, if you want these worksheets, they're linked in the description.